Welcome to the very first data value show. We have Joe joining us in a second. So I'm currently in the UK in the Mean Data Studio in the LEIT office, this is the first of hopefully many shows where we'll be having guests on talking about data value. Data value can come in many ways, maybe business value, maybe it's data value to the community, but we'll be discussing and that hopefully adds value with data involved as well. Hopefully Joe will be joining us in a second. We've got an open agenda to some degree. The initial one really is just to talk about the advisor data community, what's happened since I've been involved, and get Joe's insight into that, and also look at what's going on with some of the meetups, the meetup scene, and some of the conferences that are going on. So, without further ado, I'm going to add the one and only Joe Reis.
Hey,
you're back to back, isn't it?
Yeah, wearing the same shirt. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's what I do best. Smell terribly. How are you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you, and thank you very much for being the first trial run. So from this side of the fence, so it's a gamekeeper turned poacher. I think I used to gate crash on your shows. Now you've
we can talk about that too. We can talk about that. That was pretty fun. So
we're good. So I've already done the intro of what it's about, but I think just to go by the title, so it's the data value show. So I can't do a Monday morning data chat because Joe's already got that one, and he's already got that nailed in his community and what he's given to the community, and many shows done. So we're trying to be a little bit different, focus on the data value, but we'll probably overlap with a similar guest sometimes as well because.
Well, you have a guest like me on the show. The value is very questionable, but we'll find out. So,
you're too modest. You're too modest. So maybe let's start on the initial time that we actually met. So you've been, and I think at the time you were doing research for your book, and I think you had Thank God It's Friday. He's talking data engineering. So let's talk about that event.
The show. When we met?
Okay,
so for the audience, how we met actually, so I think, I don't know if I commented or you commented, but anyway, Greg Kikio, shout out to Greg, awesome guy, but he had a post, and then somehow I commented and you commented or something, and you're like, who's this Joe guy? I actually think you hated me or something. So anyway, you were, so Ben Rogajan, Seattle data guy, and I were doing a Friday live stream on LinkedIn and YouTube. And then you kept commenting so much that I was like, screw it. Let's just get this guy on the show because it's going to be easier for me to answer your comments live than it is for me to answer them in chat. And the look on Ben's face was hilarious because I said, I'm going to bring this guy on. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, trust me, this will work out really well. Either this guy, Chris, is going to be awesome or he's going to look like a total ass in public. And either way, it's going to be fun.
Which one was it though? I don't comment. I think it was.
I think it was both actually. Yeah, you kind of. No, I'm kidding. We ended up being really good friends. I think you're the most frequent guest on a lot of our shows at this point, right? So it's like, yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, it was great to get involved, and I think that leads us quite nicely on to the topic of the rise of the community. And shout out to Greg, who obviously was a little bit ahead of both of us in what he was doing out there. LinkedIn voice a couple of times, but he was my example of someone adding to the community and following him for a while and seeing how it looked like he was always putting posts out and always topical, and creating good discussions. And how I saw how he always interacted with people, I thought, he's not just posting out there. He's valuing people's opinion. Even someone that wasn't good opinions, but he was questioning them. But he really created discussions which I hadn't seen before at that stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a testament to Greg though, and I think he's definitely a master of content and a master of, I think, building dialogue and all that kind of stuff. So, I think it's a testament to, being able to, build community, build audience, and more importantly, the way you do that is, I think, driving good discussions, which we can talk about as well. But yeah, I mean, obviously it worked. I mean, we're here now. We're basically second brothers now. I mean, you're one of my best friends.
Data nerds from different herds. That's what we say, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's definitely true. But yeah.
That's cool. So I think the other thing that I've seen, and you've been part of that, especially the first one we had in London, is the data meetup scene. And we all experienced that COVID era where, for me, that was pretty much where I got much more involved in LinkedIn and the community aspect there. But it fed some part of that knowledge net, that community feel. But the real face-to-face meetups, which shout out to Ethan Aaron. He started what's become a movement, I'd say, with meetups being hosted all around the world now. But yeah, I think how do you see them? Well, I've got my views, but I think it'd be great to hear your views. How do you see they've got much more of a following than some were like the vendor-led ones, which are very much there's a presentation there, you're sitting down. I mean, they both have a place, but.
They both have a place, but I think especially during COVID, you had the option of being inundated with vendor content, right? And at the same, so I think that got really exhausting, right? I mean, I always equate it to those like timeshare meetings that you go to they give you like a ski pass or something like that. I think South Park had an episode on that called Aspen, where parents go to Aspen and they have to sit through a timeshare meeting to get a ski pass. So I always equate it to that, right? Where it's like, you're gonna have to. Nobody, I think very rarely people want to go sit through vendor pitches, right? You don't willingly like say, "Gosh, I know what I need more of in my life is another vendor pitch," right?
Yeah.
At the same time, with the pandemic, as it was kind of receding in the States, at least, people wanted to, get back out in the community and see what was left of it. I had the fortune of going. I think that it was the second happy hour that Ethan was putting on in New York City. And at that time, it was interesting. I mean, the data scene had been decimated, right? The meetup scene was gone. Matt Turk used to run, or he still runs the, the First Marks Data Driven NYC. And that used to be this marquee event with hundreds of people showing up and hundreds of people on the wait list. Right. And, so, I mean, but that was just rebuilding at that time. Ethan, I think in his infinite wisdom, thought it would be cool just to get people to show up to, just have a beer. And the thing is, the trick is everyone pays for their own drinks, right? So it's not like you're showing up and everyone, vendors covering it. And I think that's great. It actually promotes, I think, a better dialogue and a better way of chatting. So, I got a lot of friends in New York, and it was just good just having a beer like normal people. Then I was there I was there in September at the happy hour, and then I came back again in October, I think it was, because Matt Housley and I were speaking at Data Driven NYC, right? And I think that was starting to build back up then. That was a cool live event that we were at, and it felt like now I think Matt's events. You were at a Data Driven not like last week, right?
Yeah, last week, a really interesting one. Talking about obviously LLMs and. I think we can tell it. Yeah, I think
what was the crowd like though? What was the crowd like?
So it was still quite busy. I mean, there was a lot there. Yeah. Big queue for the drink and food at the halfway mark. Right. But a lot of people sat down, and the speakers were. I found them. What they were talking about very interesting. It was new topics. It wasn't as if it was just the same old stuff regurgitated. There was elements to what we see as best practice, and I think LLM is just you talked about it before when we were talking about how engineering's taken concepts from Lean, concepts from DevOps, and other development methodologies, and it came into its own in data. I think that's the same thing there with what they're talking about with LLMs and prompt engineers and vector databases to capture this stuff and the associated metadata management and deploying of it as well. So it's this, I found it really interesting. So it was good for that, but there's also value I've had out of those. You talk about those meetups. Well, you're talking to like friendlies or frenemies as well. You're talking to other people that are doing either fellow people running consultancies. It doesn't feel like, I'm not going to tell you my secrets or about that. It is very collaborative. I think Ethan's done a grand job.
Well, your event in London was similar to that, right? I think I went to your inaugural low-key London happy hour, in October as well. So I went directly from New York to London, and we hung out for a week, and that was cool to see too. I mean, because at your event too, I think the first one there was a lot of consultants there, but it wasn't like everyone's telling each other to go piss off. It was I think pretty well, not maybe you don't subtle British way, like call each other like a wanker or something. But it was a good group though, right? And so Salt Lake City. I mean, we don't really drink as much here, but I've been running meetups here for a long time, like definitely over a decade. And I think actually longer than that if I count co-organizing other types of events and stuff. But the meetup scene here is getting back to where it was before. I mean, I could argue Salt Lake has as vibrant of a meetup scene as a lot of your bigger cities and stuff. It's just there's a lot of surprisingly Salt Lake has a lot of tech activity. But again, it's the communities are back, and I think it's awesome to see. And so it's.
Top tip for going to meet up in Salt Lake City: have your passport with you. They won't let you in there otherwise. Which I've fallen foul of a few times.
Yeah, it did happen.
So. They don't have that sort of stipulation in the venue that I use for my meetups, as Joe was able to experience. But yeah, I suppose it's a good time to shout out for the next London meetup is on Tuesday, the usual space. So you'll find it on the LEIT.
Oh, the Q bar?
Yeah, the Q bar again.
Nice,
so
fun
on
spot.
Tabernacle Street. So same spot. Yeah, we haven't been kicked out of it yet, so it's going quite well. So
I think they like you guys. Yeah, as long as you don't trash it too badly, you'll be fine. Yeah. So.
But I think the funny thing you mentioned there is we did it on the back of you were over. It was a good reason to do it, and Ethan had been doing them quite regularly. But yeah, the response was great. It was, I can't wait for the one next month. And we God, I'm doing a monthly now. And we've missed the odd month, but they are every 4 to 6 weeks. So I'm trying to get a good cadence on them as well.
I mean, I'm going to one in Vancouver Thursday this week.
Okay, cool.
Right? Yeah, Vancouver, BC. They have them there too, and
I think the first time I noticed though.
Yeah, it's not a good time to go. Well, I mean, it's actually a lovely time to go. Like Squamish is really cool up there. But the first time I noticed, to kind of rewind back, the first time I saw like an in-person event really take off after the pandemic was 2021 in November. I was out there, the ML Ops community. So shout out to Demetrios Brinkman for building that massive community during COVID. But we had an in-person event there, and that was cool. It was just low key kind of drinks with nerds. But what was cool is that was the first time a lot of people in San Francisco had been out in like 2 years. I mean, you got to remember, San Francisco was under insane lockdown too, right? So you couldn't do crap. Plus, there were fires everywhere, and a lot of people had moved, so it definitely wasn't the same city. But went there, and it was cool. I got to see a lot of people I'd only seen on Slack, and finally make some friends, and and it was kind of the who's who of the ML and AI community in the Bay Area. Which, if you understand that community, it's like these are like the top people in the world that you're getting pretty drunk with, and like that was a lot of fun, right? And I think everyone is just excited to be out and about again and not being cooped up, in an expensive, small apartment. And it was just really cool to see that. I think I'll always remember that those types of moments where people were, being reintroduced to society. It sounds like you're done doing time, you're getting out. But it was cool.
Yeah. So I think we're seeing we have the Snowflake and Databricks conferences coming up. I suppose it's and also Ethan taking his format of having the low-key meetups, now taking it Vegas style. I don't know how you can actually call it a low-key meetup in Vegas on a roof garden, but he's still keeping with the same low-key status. So
I mean, what's your alternative though? What are you going to do? A low-key event at some divey place in Vegas? There's a ton of those if you go out on the outside of the strip. like kind of leaving Las Vegas
maybe
kind of thing.
the golden
there
nugget.
too.
Yeah, the golden nugget
go
on
to Fremont Street.
Yeah, 25.
Yeah.
They are mean data streets, by the way, so be careful.
I mean, you could have a low-key data buffet there too, to be frank. That would be kind of funny. So just, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad he hasn't gone down that low-key. So, yeah, so I'm going to be attending that. But I think you're over in an alternative event, aren't you, Darren?
What's that?
You're going to the Databricks one, is that right?
Yeah. I was supposed to go to the what was that? Snowflake. I was supposed to go speak there, but I don't know. Things happened, so I ain't speaking there. Yeah, so I'll be in the Bay Area instead. I actually want to make it out to Ethan's event on Monday, but I don't think the timing's going to work on that, unfortunately. Which sucks because like all my friends are like there. It's cool, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm flying there on Sunday for Ethan. I'm only doing for Ethan's event there. Obviously, I'll be going to some of the Snowflake bit as well. But I suppose that having Snowflake and Databricks just doing an event on the same day, it was a bit of a surprise to us when I saw that happen. But I suppose is there enough space to have this many big conferences? I mean, AWS has its massive one. Snowflake has its one. Data. Is it and in our very vendor centered, how do you see the future of having these conferences that are very well led by one particular vendor? We've got big data.
They're a necessary evil, right? They're a necessary evil but I mean, it's a huge expense for the vendor, I'm sure, right? I mean, I've been to reInvent several times. These conferences ain't cheap. I mean, you know how much it costs to rent out these venues. It's a lot of money. I actually have no idea how much it costs to rent it out, but I can only imagine it's millions of dollars. And so I mean, but it's a necessary evil in some ways, right? Because if you're not doing it, then your competitors are. And the thing is, it's a necessary evil for the vendors and the partners, right? So you have to show up and play the game if you're going to be a part of it, quote, the alliance, right? And so that's so I don't see them going away. What I do see, sort of the future though, is I think what Ethan's doing with his portable low-key data conference, where it's just, I think, giving people what they want. The thing is, when I show up to conferences, I used to get passes to the conference itself. I never get passes anymore. There's no reason for me to. Because all the talks are online, right? But what's the value of like paying for a you can go walk around the vendor hall. That's cool, but and it was kind of sad. A few conferences ago, like reInvent, for example, it was just all the vendors were talking to each other. It was all vendors. There were no customers.
Yeah.
So, and it's getting different. It's changing now, but I think with the downturn, a lot of companies, customers are pulling back travel budgets. So to be able to justify paying a couple grand for a pass ain't going to be happening. So I just think, that's the nature of a conference after COVID. I do have to question, like, what is it for at the end of the day? Right now, I think it's just because it's tradition and we've done it this way. Therefore, we're going to keep doing it. But another conference like Day-to-Day Texas was a good one, where I think that was like the party masquerading as a conference, right? That's Ian asked a question here. Will be bigger than the Star Trek conventions in Vegas. Maybe they'll be the same. I don't know.
I think when I was there at the ThoughtSpot one last year, they actually had the rubbish convention. I think it was trash convention. I didn't realize they actually had a special convention for that. And unfortunately, I questioned it to the people in the list. I said, "What? You've got a convention for trash as well?" And they were quite offended because they were actually attending that one. So, there's a conference for everything out there. Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't waste management, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, waste management.
Yeah. I mean, they got a giant golf event down in Arizona too, or maybe it was Vegas. Actually, no, I think it was Vegas. Anyway, I don't really golf, but a good friend of mine, he was going to it. But he said it's like giant party, like probably one of the biggest. If you wanted to hang out with like a bunch of wasted people for a weekend, that's definitely your place. I mean, it's got the perfect name for it too, right? So, but anyway, that's definitely. The nature of I don't think conferences are going away. I do think that the value add for participants really needs to be there, right? So, like the nature of a talk at a conference, right? It's like, you got to, the talks, if you're a speaker, right, you're expected to do things sort of the conference way. You have to do it how the vendor, the conference organizer wants you to do it, using their slides, their collateral, all the stuff. For people like me, it's like it's a lot of extra work given where I am right now. I have a lot of other things going on, so I just don't have time to put together the kind of talk that I think I could give. And so I opted out of, one of the big conferences for that reason. Not to say I wouldn't want to talk there. It's just I had stuff going on. But it's like, what's the value? What's the value? We're talking about value, right? What's the value for the community? What's the value for vendors? You have to show up. It's sort of expected, right? Otherwise, you're going to get favoritism happening.
I think you just better get on with the value thing. Is there should be a purpose of going to a particular conference. There has to be either getting to speak to peers or getting to speak to someone that's done this before, getting to advise someone. If that's the purpose of it, it's going. But I think just going. If you can watch it all online anyway, and you've already got a good network anyway, it is more. It's more the networking aspect than getting the value, and it's networking. Yeah.
So what I do at conferences, I just show up because Vegas is like a 50-minute flight for me. And if I'm a cheap bastard flying Frontier, it costs me like $15 or something. I don't know, something outrageous. So I'll just like show up for the day, hang out, and leave. Like it costs me nothing. And the thing is, that's typically my approach. Maybe if I get a hotel, it's somewhere on the strip, it costs like, I don't know, a nickel. So it's like there's a lot of value for me to show up because I get to hang out with a lot of friends and and that kind of thing. And that's the networking is absolutely key. You just let people know you're there, and that works out well.
There's Big Data London obviously coming up in September.
I'm actually keynoting that one. Yep.
Looking forward to that. I think that what I liked about that one and is it's free, and it does help with that London community. You don't have to, if you're in London anyway, it's no long travel for it. You don't have to buy a ticket for it. It's over a couple of days, and it's a good low cost, high value event because you don't have to stay over in those particular, unless you're traveling like yourself, Joe. But most people in London.
I'm bringing my kids this time too, but they want.
I know. You're in a week, aren't you? But then I think the other one you mentioned, Day-to-Day Texas, which we both presented at January this year. And I love that. That was a real community. The who's who of authors were there. Everyone that had written a book, which leads on to something else anyway. So who's who was there, and I found it very useful for meeting people I'd either just LinkedIn messaged until then, and putting a face to the message, which
sorry I missed your talk at Day-to-Day Texas, by the way.
Bill's was better anyway, I heard anyway, so but he was at the same time. So,
but community, speaking community though, right? Matt and I spontaneously, we were supposed to give a talk to sort of close out the conference that day, and we decided, well, it was during it was during happy hour, right? So there's drinks, everyone's drinking, everyone's kind of tired of hearing people talk. So I was like, well, wouldn't it be fun if we just had people talk instead of listening to us talk? So we did a spontaneous town hall, right? And the notion was, okay, you have pretty much the luminaries of the industry all hanging out together. Why not have a town hall and talk about some topics? I think that we're obviously invited back in 2024 to do that, but I thought that was pretty cool because it meant that it's not too often that you get to hear dialogues from people like Bill Inman and Jamak Dagani were all sitting right next to each other and just getting their opinions on data, and lots of other people and lots of heavy hitters in the industry were all hanging out. And it was I think like, when are you going to get these people together again? You had a great input as well, and it's just so to me that's what drives value. I think people got value out of that. That's about building community too, right? Because otherwise, the thing I now that I speak at conferences too, the thing I notice is there's it's hard as a speaker to connect with your audience in a way that you get to understand, like, what are the questions, what are they about. Typically, when you speak at a conference, it's a one-way thing, right? You're delivering a talk and then you leave, but where I get a lot of my ideas is just going and talking to people, right? So I always make it a point to try and facilitate conversation. It's a huge part of, I think, what makes me smarter to some extent, or perhaps dumber, but so.
I think it's the topic we're going to cover. Is that bubble, doing things in a bubble, or doing things in it as a community? And what I love with your book, and when I helped just do a bit of some reviewing of them, just seeing how everyone else is involved as well, but just seeing everyone pitching in and shaping what you were there, and giving other viewpoints, which it's been a massive hit. And I think you can attribute a lot of that to how you approached it with your shows, validating with different parts of the audience, doing all your interviews with people, shaping ideas, and which is something that following in your footsteps to some degrees and borrowing the other half of the dynamic data duo. So Joe and Matt that obviously wrote.
You're like our adopted cousin now, so it's fine.
Yeah. So I'm borrowing Matt for a bit. So me and Matt are working on a book titled yet to be agreed, but high performance data playbook. Working title.
Yeah.
But I'm loving your Substack stuff. So that's something that we're starting to do soon. Me and Matt have got the high performance Substack, which our first article is due out this weekend, but we'll be up next weekend now. We'll be out. But yeah, you've been putting some stuff on. Modeling is part of your. Well, you may want to specify what sort of modeling is your speciality, but modeling is
fashion
your specialty. Modeling. Yes.
Yeah. Fashion modeling is my specialty.
I thought it was swimwear myself.
Yeah. Well, only at Big Data London. So no, I mean, it's modeling, right? I think this is an interesting one. I feel after I finished fundamentals of data engineering, I had to take a step back and understand what parts did I feel were incomplete. I felt like the section on modeling was incomplete, and I started. And the other things I noticed was, okay, so what are a lot of the problems that we see right now, in the world of data, right? I think believable data is one of them, right? You have a whole suite of a whole ecosystem now, observability, quality, et cetera, trying to capture a lot of different aspects of data. But when I start digging under the root causes, I'm like, I think understanding more to the point, I think a lack of understanding of data modeling across the data lifecycle presently is a pretty big factor in why we're having a lot of the issues we are as an industry, right? So it all starts upstream. I believe that the notion of data modeling, and I'm not just talking about like physical data modeling. I'm talking about the notions like understanding data from first principles, understanding the processes, the rules, the definitions of vocabulary and so forth, and translating those down into quote models, across the life cycle. That's something that I think is just for whatever reason, is sort of a lost art. And so I've been digging deep into that and understanding why. And that's been my major focus for this year is grappling that whole problem. I just see it as it's a fundamental problem to the industry that if we can't figure this out and we can't get back on track, I don't think it's a good thing for the industry.
No, I think we echoing some of the things you're saying there. A lot of things we're doing now is reactive to a situation that we haven't gone and had that modeling discipline. And I think we talked about. I saw in your nerdy rants number 5, I think it was, that just having things in one big table. That's still a model. There's still some modeling in that. It's just very bad ones. And I think people understanding. You touch this. What's appropriate at the right time, and I think that goes with everything in this data world. Is we strive for perfection. Perfection's it's like North Star. It's what you're aiming for. But maybe if you shoot for stars, you might hit the moon. So it's good to have something to aim for, but it's what you think is appropriate for that part of the journey and what you need to achieve at that stage. So,
well, I'm going to shout out to John Cook. He's got a good question here, which we can't really show because I don't know, StreamYard's sort of not cooperating today. But he asked, would you say it's a business context to data mapping rather than data modeling per se? I think these are two sides of the same coin, really. I think I definitely agree that the business context and data mapping are things that directly translate to data modeling. Because again, data modeling is really modeling in general is about representing some aspect of reality according to the way you're going to process that information and use it, right? And so you first have to map it, obviously. I mean, that's the notion of and it depends, if you want to get pedantic about it, I can make a pretty strong argument that the act of mapping and the act of modeling are very, very similar, and to the point where depending on how you're doing it, they're basically the same thing, right? If you're doing a logical data map or a model, you're drawing things and relating to each other, away from physical implementation, but that's still a mapping exercise and still a modeling exercise. And so I mean, the notion really is getting back to basics. I think getting back to the broader context of how we think about information and concepts in the business and translating that into the various ways that we use and store data, right? So again, but there's different models now, right? Machine learning models, huge thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's and then of course Jason Taylor, he asks how much value is lost to a business by not doing data modeling well. Moreover, how do you measure that?
Yeah,
it's an interesting question. The ROI thing, I think, is something that I'm still exploring because it's in some ways it's a counterfactual exercise, right? So the absence of modeling costs you what at the end of the day, right? But I think it's not necessarily a discussion either of what does the lack of a relational model cost you? It's how much time do you spend going back and forth over a confusion on business concepts, definitions, a lack of understanding processes, and translating that to a lack of fidelity of your data, I think is maybe a better way of viewing it. So what's the opportunity cost of not having a coherent view of your business in a way that you can capitalize on through data, I think is maybe the better way of asking a question like that. Yeah. And again, you're writing a book on monetization of value and so forth. I think this is something where, but it's, so, I mean, on the one extreme, as I asked you at an event in Verbier once, I mean, what's the ROI of putting on your socks in the morning? And then, you did.
That was a tough question.
It was a tough question, right? And but I don't think it's exactly like that, right? I think it's how much time are you wasting by not having a coherent sense of your business and data? So yeah.
And I always used to like the term friction. So we've talked about this before. So we use it internally here as friction being the time, complexity, and effort to do a particular activity. And flipping that into data modeling. If you need to ask a question of your data model, what's the time, effort, and the time, effort, and complexity of actually doing that particular activity? If that becomes so complex, you think, right, I need to reduce that friction. If I had a model that's modeled this way, Joe Blogs or anyone, Joe Blogs is like your equivalent in a John Doe, I think, is in your. But anyway, anyone could actually go and perform it with some simple instructions. So
well, and I think the way you answer these questions too is through stuff like value stream mapping, right? So again, value stream mapping is mapping an end-to-end process according to the information flows and the business process flows, with the goal of satisfying an external customer, right? And so that's how I would probably ultimately view the quote, ROI or the value of these exercises is, okay, so are you reducing lead time? Are you reducing process time? Are you increasing percent completeness and percent accuracy, right? And I think if you can align on metrics like that, you have a better shot at evaluating value. I think value is an elusive thing in our industry, as you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are lots of books being written on data monetization. But I think if you can take a step back and really understand from the value that you're providing to an end customer, perhaps maybe that's a better way of doing it. John Cook also has there's an interesting aspect of the dynamism versus static structure at a point in time. I mean, absolutely, but that's exactly why you want to be able to fluidly model these business processes, like stuff like value stream mapping. Again, I feel like that's been sort of the missing link. Is again, we tend to operate in silos, right? So I see another discussion here where somebody's talking about third normal form. I think it's a stupid discussion actually to talk about because it misses the entire point of what we're trying to do from a broader picture. We're focused on the silos and the tactics versus I think the ultimate goal, which is delivering value to an end customer, and doing that through data, doing that through a coherent viewpoint of the data is fundamentally what we should be striving for as an industry. And if we don't do that, then I think we're wasting our time.
I think so. And me and John have John, if you're about tonight, we can meet our locals at our local farm in town. We've talked about
what's the Winchester?
No, it's Hemingway. The Hemingway. Well, no, everyone go down there. No, anyone's invited. The Hemingway in Hackney.
Okay, it was a Shaun of the Dead reference. Anyway.
Okay, I missed that. Oh yeah, it looks very similar to that pub actually. But I think I'll touch on some of the stuff we can talk about measuring and the business value channels that we're working with Matt on for monetizing data. But I think the key thing I've spoken to John about this is if you can't measure it, you can't optimize it. And that having that business process defined that then you can then measure against you've then got something you can evidence any benefit or not that you make against it. And doing nothing's always an option, and that's your baseline. What if we don't do anything at all, and keep it at that? And that's sometimes that may be the approach that needs to be taken for a period, but it's always something that should be compared against others. But the talk about business value, and again, like yourself, Joe, and Jane Molly, the thoughts of this are evolving as we're talking to more people and we're writing these articles. But I think I did a post the other day saying that, quoting, business value as a positive impact, an evidenceable positive impact on your bottom line. And I think the key word there was evidenceable. And the concept in the article, or the article we publish, is if you can't, if you want to stand in a court of law, the way of actually winning the case is having evidence. And if you haven't got evidence, you have
ChatGPT. I'm kidding.
Well, yeah. Well, that's but it'll lie with hallucinations. What you need to do is have a ChatGPT that you're going to have your own memory area that you're going to load in all the documents that you think are referenced. Tell it the rules of engagement. It can't lie. Only take things from this cluster of information that is of a score of X amount to your good metadata. Then it probably will be better than what it is. But we're probably not far away from that. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, it's back to the business value that you. So if you can't actually evidence that, if you can't have undisputable evidence, you'll have to have circumstantial. Circumstantial can come from many different KPIs or metrics that collectively have given you the indicator that it has made a positive impact. But they're harder to actually prove, and there may be some ambiguity of how that's been calculated, but it's an indicator. But your best ones are, look, I've tracked in my business process now. I've replayed these changes on my history. Voila, I can evidence that this was X amount more efficient onboarding a customer, reduction of fraud by X amount, or reduction in man hours by X amount. But you could actually evidence it if you have the historical metadata associated with the business processes. But yeah, so that's that. Yeah, I think that's the key thing to any data project out there is, it is great doing these things, but if you need to provide whatever you can to evidence the value, even if it may be circumstantial evidence. So yeah. So I missed what so we covered everything. Yeah, what we got going on.
We're doing data communities, though, right? I think it's interesting. I think that what I'm looking at the LinkedIn conversation here, I think it's a good evidence of a good data community. It's John's cool, Jason's cool. A lot of other people in this chat are Ian and Alex and so forth.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all friends. Yeah, and I think it's cool, right? Because I mean, what I find funny is that we all met on LinkedIn of all places, which I mean, you got to remember back when LinkedIn started. I mean, I've had a LinkedIn account for a while. That was like a place where you just put your resume and kind of forgot about it. But during COVID, the data community on LinkedIn exploded, right? I mean, you came out of the woodwork, and and a lot of other people did too. And it's interesting. I always think if the pandemic never happened, the counterfactual thought exercise is what would the data community look like? I know for me, I think I would probably be a lot more provincial and living in thinking about my own town or my own local geography. But I think COVID broke me out of that. I was telling somebody the other day, Salt Lake is the last thing on my mind at this point. I was having lunch with a friend of mine last week. He's tied into the startup scene in Salt Lake, and he's mentioning all these companies. And I have no idea who any of these companies are. They're not. I mean, just because my mind right now is focused on the globe, UK, New York, Australia, Asia, Middle East. That's where my head is. How can I help impact people? All over the world now. It's not just about your town or your state anymore. There's a lot more to it, and I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think so. And you're right. I use CV just as to say when I changed jobs to see where someone was working at, or to find out where they're working at now.
Yeah,
that was it. And it, it was. And I think right at the beginning for me as well, it was to do a post. And you see my post out. Yes, they have spelling mistakes in sometimes. Yes, they're probably done on the move sometimes. But I call them that they are brain farts and thoughts that are happening at that moment. And that wasn't how I did it before. I mean, before I think, well, I've got to do 6 tips on this, and I had to think it through and make sure I wouldn't be questioned on anything or look stupid. But I think after a while, it wasn't quite a hostile place as I'd seen on some occasions back then. Maybe less
like
purists than now. Yeah.
And, I mean, I'm not on Twitter. I hate that place. I have lurker accounts, but I don't post, right? So, I have lurker accounts for most social media, but it's like I don't engage. No, honestly, anymore. It's interesting with LinkedIn because I think after a certain level of engagement, I'm starting to just post and ghost. So I'll set a post on mute and just move on because I think at this point it's like it's a balance, right? You say what you need to say. Yeah. And so, and the thing is, it depends. Like I think at a certain point with a post, if it gets popular, it just takes on a life of its own, and you can contribute only so much. I would say, otherwise, it becomes a full-time job just trying to stay on top of a post. And
it does.
I think just move on.
Yeah, it's like the first 90 minutes. I think is the crucial time to respond, get the conversations up. Yeah, anyone that's in your main feed's probably added something by them. I had a couple, and again, they are just random thoughts. I think Jenga was one I did when I was looking at, is your modern data stack wobbly now? Because it's like a game of Jenga, you keep adding pieces to your stack. Generated some, why is your stack so wobbly? Because you forgot to hire a data architect. So it does create some good conversation, some of these things. And it's nice to raise the profile of some subjects. So, I mean, for example, the whole data modeling one last year, sometime, a bit of a rant at one time about some people blaming the modern data stack for it being so badly data modeling. And no, that's because you didn't data model it. It's not the modern data stack's fault per se. And hashtag bring back data modeling, and that itself created a little bit of a community of one from Data World Live and Christian Larry, is it Larry Payton?
Larry Burns, you got Christian Call, you got a few other people. Yeah.
Cool. Everyone chipping in and giving their views on that as well.
That's what it's about. I mean, that's what I think that's what drives the discussion forward. I mean, you got to remember, before I think a lot of these discussions that would happen online, you'd be doing this at a conference, right? Yeah. At some stupid salad bars, you're getting your food, and then at a table, and then you have to go back to a talk, and it's it's over, and then maybe at drinks at a afterward. But it's like now you can have these discussions, from the comfort of your own keyboard, right? Jason Taylor has a good question here. How much of LinkedIn content in our community, I mean the data community, do you find is promotional versus having a discussion? I think it's an interesting one, but I think you can spot the promotional content a mile away. And what I've noticed is people don't really engage with promotional content, for a lot of reasons. But if it's, stuff that engages a discussion, I'll give you a good example, right? Chad Sanderson, right? He started talking about data contracts, data quality, a little over a year ago, maybe a bit more actually, a bit more, but he's managed to, I think, drive a big discussion in the community, and he's managed to build a huge following on that. And he's not the only one. I think you've done a good job at what you've done, Chris. And, it's a lot of, dynamic opinions and so forth. And that's what drives it forward. But the promotional stuff, you can spot it a mile away these days. Like I get asked often to do sponsored posts. I normally refuse to, because it's just part of my brand is, I think, having those quote authentic discussions. And the moment I start shilling is the moment that, kind of all goes out the window. I do advise companies, I tend to, try and help them in a tasteful manner and so forth. But, for the most part, I think it depends on your objectives, right? Like if you find yourself being a marketing machine and that's what you're about, go for it. Go do promotional posts. Nobody's going to stop you. I think at the same time, you just got to understand, like, what does that do to the longevity of what you're trying to do, as a person in the community. Do you want to have discussions to promote? It's a very fine point. Yeah.
It is. I think I touched on that, so because I talked about that Jenga one, and I did put in there, strapline. If your platform's having a wobble, give us a call, we'll help you out. But yes, it was a little bit of a salesy thing, but I was cool down it because I don't normally like sales posts. So this was pretty good. I thought, damn it, yeah, I suppose I am being a bit of a salesperson.
Oh, somebody called you out. I mean, it's fair though, right? I mean, because
exactly.
if people are not used to it, then I don't think I ever once for Ternary did like any shilling posts, call Ternary today. I mean, because I keep it real separate. I figure the brand you build, it'll translate over. The thing I hate, I'm going to say this publicly right now, is like if you get on somebody's thread and you're saying, God, well, that's what this solution's for, right? Like, go check out technology XYZ. Like, I hate that. There's no better way to get on my bad side than do stuff like that.
Yeah. And you get a lot of the bots going and putting it. It was a good post. They're going to get someone putting their email address on it or just call out. So that's a waste of value of the time. And there's a couple of times I've deleted those ones as well. But
and then you have the person who talks about the company in every damn post, right? Like, that stuff irritates the hell out of me. It's like you don't add anything substantive to the discussion. You simply just put your company in there and say, well, this is why this is better. Like, we solved this problem. Like, nobody gives a shit, frankly. And it's like, it actually works against your brand if you do that kind of, like, I see salespeople doing this a lot. Please, salespeople, stop this stuff. Marketing people, stop it. It's silly. It's stupid.
So it looks stupid. I suppose, and I suppose this is where I'm trying to do the balance, because these shows, we will have the odd vendor on as well, but the idea behind it is we'll be talking about business, a solution. It's a solution-focused discussion which vendors can help with. But we're trying to abstract it away from that, and there'll be some vendors on giving their views, but I think we're trying to keep our independent view and be very much focused on the end game. So what solution we try to solve for your our customers?
Do you want to have a situation like I do with my book, where people just post about it every day? Like, not to toot my own horn, but like, if you can get that level of virality around your idea, that's where you want to be. And again, I'm not trying to say like, hey, look at me, I'm pretty damn awesome. But it's like, the number of posts that I've done in my book is pretty much when it first came out.
Yeah.
Right. Since then, it's like, and not a day goes by there's not somebody saying this is awesome, because you know what it did? It added value to the world, and it added value to people to the point where they want to write these giant posts. I'm like, that's the ultimate testament to whether you're adding value, is if somebody is going to take the time to talk about it and promote you. Yeah, there you go.
Your best sales for US marketing people are actually your clients, so or the consumers of it. So you can't get better referral on that. And as you say, it's still out. I mean, it's over a year now since the book was out, and I still see them every day as well. So massive following on the in the data engineering community, the data community, but it obviously resonated with so many people. So I think that is a testament of the research and how you went about doing that.
It's all because you were one of our reviewers, Chris. I mean,
and the shows like Egg Crash as well. But it's definitely, you definitely didn't get definitely any of my comments needed spelling checks or or grammatical checks at least anyway. But I'm sure there was some value in there somewhere. But we can quantify that really at another time. Yeah, it was good fun. I'm looking forward to seeing some more of your content on your upcoming book. So is there a date you're working towards at the moment? Or are you keeping that a little bit?
It was supposed to be done by now, but I'm in the middle of I got a course on O'Reilly that's coming out, kind of based in the book, that's going to be out later this summer. Got a giant course coming up that I'm not ready to announce yet, but it's going to be massive.
So it's going to be big. Is that a giant one? It must be big.
Yeah, I think it'll be a big announcement. But and frankly, large language models threw me for a loop, and I think it still is with modeling, because it's just because the interactions with data is one of the pieces where I feel like that sort of closes a loop with the data lifecycle. Is like, this is how you get value out of it. Creating tables in their own doesn't really mean anything unless people are able to query them and get data out of them. I mean, it's true. But now, the notion of, what does it mean at the end of the day, right? Could you replace a lot of the physical modeling with large language models? I don't know. Maybe that's something I've been thinking about, right?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of reverse engineering, and going to that Matt Turk's data-driven event the other day, and it was I didn't from what I saw of it, it really got me thinking around the context, and the more context you give to this, and having that feedback loop to make the context is correct, it's a game changer in some places. And for example, people say, "Oh, you're going to have to write an interface to the relational." If you've got a relational database already, just let the LLM write an SQL query to go and query it for you. And as long as it's got the metadata and the credentials, it's really going to simplify that. But you have to give it a decent model, or you have to allow it to work out what model should be put on it after maybe a query pattern. So, I mean, it's interesting to see where I think it will go. It's not going away. It's certainly a need for it. It's just probably how it's driven for going forward. I think will be the change.
Yeah, it's interesting, and then vector databases is the other one, right? So I mean, the notions I'm thinking of is all machine learning stuff. I think like stuff like relational dimensional modeling, that's old hat. Data vault, that's old hat. That's been discussed for decades now, right?
Yeah.
But what about streams? What about embeddings, vector databases, largely machine? I mean, that was the notion of the day one. It's just everything else that's been happening lately. I'm like, okay, so fundamentally, is this a red herring, or does it actually tangibly matter at the end of the day? And so that's all the other stuff I've been thinking about is like, if I'm going to write a book, let's make it as at least modern as possible. And then again, for the audience, like the early chapters are going to be released on Substack. So you get a chance to check it out and also beat the crap out of the ideas. I'm not saying that everything I'm saying is right. I think this is actually going to be very polarizing. Because what I'm finding is data modeling is one of these religious topics where everybody has an opinion, and it's actually very contentious. No matter how you slice it, you're not going to make anyone happy. But it needs to be said, and
it's quite ironic. It's quite ironic that the term modeling is understood, so you need to have a business term for the model, which is a model.
Well, I mean, the other day I saw some people on LinkedIn, but I probably put them more in the pedantic camp, talking about modeling, right, and saying conceptual and logical modeling is not data modeling, it's concept modeling and knowledge modeling, which I do agree with. But again, we're splitting hairs. Meanwhile, the whole concept of modeling and the whole practice is dying by the wayside. So I'm like, you can either keep arguing about these hair splitting things, or get back to basics and get people doing anything that's going to help this along the way. Part of the reason I think it's slipping through the cracks is precisely because people are focusing on just these stupid pedantic arguments at the cost of the art itself. Right now, it's like we're arguing about what type of oil paint to use and not focusing on whether art's dying or not. It's stupid. So actually, and I want to follow up on just a couple questions here. Let me see. Ian's got a question, because I know we've got a couple minutes left. What advice would you give your younger self if starting out in data now? Don't do it. I'm just kidding. So, I would say like focus on the fundamentals, right? It's easy to get caught up on the latest whiz bang technologies. I'd say find a good mentor too. Somebody's going to be able to guide you in a logical, not logical, but in a way that's going to really help your career. I do mentor people. It's extremely selectively. I actually started mentoring actually my coach the other day. So that's been a fun trade. But yeah, I'd say find somebody that can help you and how you can help them. Jason actually had a good question, which I want to talk on with respect to community, which was let me see here. He says, not to point fingers, but when does that become? When does that kind of following become an individual's sole business, effectively data influencers? I would say that to some extent, this happens at a certain point, you do develop a following, and that's something where you should see that as an asset. It's not often that you do get to build a following, and so you really have to be careful at how you cultivate, your audience and the community that you're building. So I think it's an individual decision. You could certainly become an influencer. I think there's different shades of being an influencer. So I think you just have to figure out what makes sense for you. I mean, I put myself in that camp now precisely because people approach me to do influencer things. And for me, it's a balance. And I'm sure, Chris, I would put you in that camp where you're an influencer in your own way. And because when you have an opinion and people do listen, and that's you do influence the conversation. And so that's, I think it's a responsibility for sure. I would say the ways you probably wouldn't want to do it, at least for me, is like be extremely short-sighted, do stupid things, piss everybody off. Actually, no, I should say, you because you have an audience, you actually do piss people off, right? But there are the people that probably aren't part of your tribe. And so, but the thing is, you got to be careful of drinking your own Kool-Aid, and I think getting too caught up in yourself.
So. I agree, and I think there's we talked about this before about when I think I've only done twice. Actually, block someone because, but for a while I found the people that I call in my not adding value commenters, and it's always the same person. It's always the same negative stuff. And I used to actually get inspired by it sometimes. I was like, does he really think like that, or can he really? And then to try and that generate. And then I got to the point where sometimes I didn't think it was worth my time to keep arguing about it, or he's commenting. I did get a little bit. Why am I getting angry over this guy? I've given him a chance, but you're right.
That's how we met.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, no, we weren't that angry. It was more fun. And this is quite good because the timings work very well. Because for us, it's not too late. So I'm only drinking fizzy pop by a brand, which I'm not going to promote, obviously. And but before, I think when you had to do a Friday night chat, it was only about 8 or 9 o'clock on a Friday night. So they were more entertaining, should we say?
Only about 12 beers in. Yeah, that's great.
But it's fun. Any more questions or anything else? I think we'll wrap up and you do a shout out.
I think it's a good discussion. I mean, Ian asked what exciting things I'm seeing out there, but I mean that's a topic for probably a totally different podcast.
It may that we asked about data related stuff. That might be in general a bit more.
Yeah, no, I'm stoked for a good podcast. I'm glad to be part of your inaugural episode. Stoked.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And yeah, it's funny. Everyone, I joked about this last week, but it's actually true. I think the only calls I'm on these days are podcasts. So, but when I actually looked at my schedule, I'm like, damn, that's actually pretty accurate. So I'm actually meeting somebody for lunch in a bit, like an actual lunch, which would be pretty interesting.
Oh, that's good. Going old school.
Yeah, he wants me to bring his boss's book for me to go read. So I don't know. It's nice enough to do that. So we'll see what happens. But I thought it was pretty cool. Anyway, man, have a good time.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah. And anyone wants to follow Joe, there's only the one Joe Reis. You better find him on there.
There's actually another one though. He's an ultra marathoner named Joe Reis. So people would ask me like, "Hey, do you run a lot of races?" I'm like, "Definitely not like that." So
there's another Chris Tabb, but he's a comedian, and that's not me.
You're funny in your own way. Yeah, I don't know if you mean it, but
yeah, it might add some value. I'm not too sure. But I suppose if you want to catch up with Joe next, you'll see him on Monday mornings. Monday mornings, Mountain Time.
Data chat.
9 a.m.
That is elsewhere.
Yeah. And
I'll be in Vancouver, BC later this week too. If you're there, then San Francisco next week. Then yeah. So
cool. Well, and you'll find me.
And also, I want to give a shout out for the Joe Reis Show, my own podcast. We've got a lot of good guests coming up. Tristan Handy from DBT. We just recorded a podcast. Colleen Fosh, she was a CrossFit Games athlete. She's now my coach. So we talk a lot about becoming moving from being an athlete to an analyst. So yeah, got a lot of interesting guests coming up. So stay tuned. So.
Cool. Yeah. Excellent. Well, and you'll find the London come to us, join us on the. Well, Joe can't make this one, but he'll be big day to London. But we've got a meet up on Tuesday. All right. And well, thank you everyone for the first of many, I hope. Anyway, so we'll be back again soon. Thanks.
Pick up the London Massive. Yep. All right.
Thank you. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.